All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back. So, today we'll be talking about what it's like working in big companies versus small companies. And so, mainly, I'll be talking about my experience working in a startup, a mid sized company, and then comparing that to my experience working in Amazon, a FAANG company. I was kind of compare and contrast what it's like and like kind of the biggest differences I've noticed between these two style of companies. So, with that said, let's just get into it. So, working at a big company, especially like with Amazon, one of the things I've noticed is that you have less creativity with your projects. And this is mainly because you're joining a large organization that already has like a set of rules, a set code base, it's already been built up over the course of years. And so your contributions are just really adding small pieces to that. You're not really kind of reinventing the wheel. I mean, unless you're put on a specific team to do that, but that's usually not the case. Usually, when you get hired, you get put onto a pre existing team that has an established code base, a way of doing things. And it's just not, you don't really get as much creativity as you might think. It's really just a bunch of like upkeep work, kind of stuff like that. So, working at Amazon, I would kind of just do tasks that I was assigned, but I didn't think that the work that I was doing was like I wasn't reinventing the wheel, like it was just work, right? Now, contrasting this to a smaller company, let's say you worked at a startup, and I personally, my first job was at a startup, so I can attest to this. You have a bit more creativity because in a startup, you have a product and you want to actually build it. More often than not, you don't have a product in the first place. So your goal getting hired is to build that initial product and then, start the company up. And so when I was working at a startup, granted, yes, the project scope was to build an app, right? We're building a fitness app. And so it was up to me and our small team to figure out how to do all that. And so even though I was way less experienced back then, I did have a lot of creativity because I got to design or decide how I wanted to do things, not necessarily with the UI because I was following a mock-up, but in terms of code, I got to figure out like how I really wanted to design this architecture and kind of write things in a clean fashion. And so, in that sense, I did get a lot more creativity developing my code versus what I would get at Amazon, which really just kind of upkeep work, like I said earlier. But to expand on this topic a little bit further, I feel like while working at large companies is nice, and don't get me wrong, you learn a lot there. Working at Amazon, I've learned more than I ever did anywhere else. I feel like working at startups gives you a lot more opportunities to learn, or at least at smaller companies, not necessarily just startups. But working at smaller companies, you have a lot more opportunities to learn just because you wear more hats. If you work at a small tech company, and maybe it could be a startup, you're getting things going, you're trying to build the MVP, the initial product. You're not just a software developer. You could be, a support engineer, a tester, a manager, maybe, a UX designer. Like, if you're building this product, you're probably doing more than one thing. And so that kind of makes you very well rounded because you have experience in a lot of areas because you're just doing the work because it needs to be done because you don't have a large team. And so that type of environment breeds like, I guess, scrappiness. So you kind of just make do with what you have and you just make it work, and that it's great. It's a fun experience, and I do recommend people try it, especially if you're early in your career. Maybe try to get in at a startup or a small to mid-sized company and try to get that experience for yourself. Whereas in a FANG company like Amazon, sure, you're learning a lot because some of the people you work with are some of the smartest people in the world. I mean, your coworkers at these big companies, they're super intelligent. If you thought you were smart going in, like at Google, for example, you're just another big fish in a sea of big fishes. Like, you're not as smart as you think you are. So it's nice because you can kind of pick apart other people's brains and learn from them. So you have other people as a resource. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that whether you're working at a small, medium, big company, it doesn't matter. At every level, you have opportunities that those companies provide that help you learn and advance your career. They just present them in a different way. So on to the next one. Another thing I want to talk about was bureaucracy. Now, this is way more common in large companies because you know, keeping with the Amazon example, Amazon is a company with, I don't even know how many employees it has, but I think as far as engineers, we have tens of thousands of engineers, right? And so when you're working in an organization that big, you have to have a set of rules and regulations in place to manage everything. So inevitably, when you're operating at that big of a level, there's gonna be bureaucracy. That's just the way it is. And so whether you like it or not, if you get a job at FAANG, you're most likely going to be dealing with it, whether it's in the form of upper management, senior engineers, managers, whatever, just people who have authority over you can probably use this bureaucracy in a way that is harmful to your career or is just annoying. There's just so many ways that bureaucracy kind of gets in the way and it's never fun. So bureaucracy, for what it's worth, is pretty much always present at large companies, and you're just going to have to learn to deal with it. Whereas at smaller companies, they may not have this bureaucratic style set in place just yet because they're too small. So with small, medium-sized companies, there might not be a bureaucracy set, but there might be, for example, at my last company that I worked at was Best Buy. And so that our office, the one that I worked at in Seattle, was I think like 200 people. So in the grand scheme of things, it was pretty small, I would say. Best Buy is a large company, but the office that we're in was relatively small, and the vibe there was very tight knit. Like everyone knew each other, even if they didn't work on the same team. So it was very nice because the office would get together and everyone was just kind of like a big family, I guess you could think of. So it was nice, it was just kind of like I was friendly with everyone and I knew everyone and I knew I could reach out to other people from different teams if I needed anything. So that's nice. That's definitely something I don't think you'll ever get at a big company because at Amazon, honestly, outside of our little cubicle area where our team sits, I don't know anyone else. Like I've never seen other teams. I don't interact with anybody. So it was just kind of different for me because I was like, oh, everyone that all works together, they all know each other in some capacity. But if you go to a large company, it's really just you stick with your team and that's about it. So that's just my experience. But I feel like if you work in a larger company, you're not going to be, unless you're an intern, you're not really going to be socializing outside of your team. So that's another thing that I've noticed. So yeah, just to recap, bigger companies, more bureaucracy, less chance to get to know people outside of your immediate team. And then it's kind of the opposite for smaller companies. So smaller companies, less bureaucracy, kind of more open environments. People know each other across the company, I would say. So there's pros and cons to each type of company. So just remember that next time you're interviewing. Like, do you want to work in a big company? It's more corporate bureaucracy, or do you want to work smaller company, has a more intimate feel? It's up to you to decide that. So I'm just here to present, kind of like the pros and cons. So anyways, continuing. So the next thing I want to touch upon is the ability to stand out. So as you can imagine, at a larger company, like I mentioned earlier, we have some of the smartest people working there, right? Like there's incredibly intelligent people. And if you manage to get a job at a FAANG company, you're probably really smart, but compared to your other peers, you're probably not as smart as you think you are. And so that might come into play here because if you're trying to get a promotion, you have to compete with everyone else and they could probably be a lot more qualified than you are. So you have to do a lot more just to get ahead and, get that promotion, get recognition from your manager. And this isn't always the case, but in my case, like at Amazon, it's pretty brutal. It can lead to, poor work-life balance, overworking, just burnout. Like I see my coworkers always trying to like one up each other and trying to like, make sure that, they stand out and they get the recognition from their managers so then they can be put in for a promo and, get that, which makes sense. I mean, obviously people want to get promotions, more money, more status, but just the way I've seen it at larger companies, it feels, I don't necessarily want to say it breeds a toxic environment, but it's not for everyone. Whereas in a smaller company, if you do good work, it tends to stick out a bit more, because, smaller number of people, the stakes usually aren't as high as they are in FAANG companies. And if you just do really good work and you happen to be really good at your job, more often than not, you will stand out at smaller companies. It's just a lot easier to see that than if you're in a sea of, thousands of engineers at a large company that are all very intelligent. So as you can imagine, the larger the number of employees, just the harder it is to stand out. I mean, that's just kind of, like I said earlier, it's like being a fish in a big ocean, right? Like that's what it's like at big companies. With smaller companies, you can think of it as like being a fish in a small pond, but just the pool is smaller, so the chances of standing out are a lot greater. And so, yeah, just the main difference between those is large companies, hard to stand out, smaller companies, easier to stand out. That's usually held true for me in my experience working at a startup, Best Buy and Amazon. So, yeah, just keep that in mind. And so the last thing I want to touch upon is money. I felt like this is something everyone wanted to hear. So more often than not, if you work at a FAANG company, that's like the top tier, right? Like you won't make any more money anywhere else. If you work at those big brand name companies, that's where the money is. You get paid a large six-figure salary, you get paid stock, sometimes equity, you get sign-on bonus, which is sometimes insane, like a lot of money just like sign on to the company before you even start collecting a paycheck. It's pretty astounding when you're in your 20s and you get a FAANG job and you're making like 200K a year. Like it's absolutely ridiculous. Like, and this is a reality for a lot of people. That's why everyone wants to get into FAANG, because that's where they know, like that's where all the money is. And for the most part, that money comes with a lot of stress, because if you want to perform and stand out amongst the crowd, like I mentioned earlier, you're going to have to perform on your A game all the time. And this can get exhausting. Yeah, sure, you're making a six-figure paycheck, but if you're stressed out constantly, is it worth it? So at least with Amazon, working there, I find to be very fast-paced and aggressive work culture. I'm not sure if it's entirely for me, but yeah, that's just a decision you're going to have to make. Do you want money and possibly induce a lot of stress in your life? Not everyone that works at big companies finds it super stressful. Some of them are able to maintain a work-life balance, but just keep that in mind. If a company offers a lot of money, there might be the expectation to work a lot and, kind of a brutal work culture. So it really just depends, but that's usually my experience with FAANG at Amazon, at least. That's just what I've seen. As opposed to smaller companies, some smaller companies they do very well, and they can actually match salaries from these top companies, but more often than not, they don't, and they pay significantly lower. But in return, they might offer you like equity, which honestly I don't really care much for, because you're just kind of waiting for it to like pay off, which usually it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, if you're not working at a big name company, you probably are not making as much money as people that work at those top tier companies. But it's not all bad, because when I worked at Best Buy, I was only making like 80-ish K a year, but I was happy because I had great work-life balance. And so I kind of miss that. I kind of miss those days. But sometimes, it's like the allure of money kind of takes over that appeal to want to have, a work-life balance. So again, that's just something you're going to have to keep in mind and decide for yourself. What do you really want to do? So yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I really hope you learned a lot of what it's like working in a big company versus smaller companies as a software engineer. Hopefully I can help you with your decision making. Hopefully if you have multiple offers, you can decide which one is right for you. I'm just here to share my experiences from my career. So hopefully it helped you out. And one last thing before we go, I just want to mention that I created a new training program called Coding Expert. And so Coding Expert differs from a lot of other coding interview prep courses in the fact that we focus on actual underlying patterns and techniques, because a lot of people like to grind leak code and memorize solutions. Whereas with Coding Expert, we help teach you underlying patterns and techniques to help you solve a wide variety of problems and that you can apply in the coding interview to start acing questions. Because in order to become good at coding interviews, it's not about remembering solutions, it's about understanding how to arrive to an answer, how to break down a problem, how to understand certain techniques that can help with certain problems after you've identified what the problem is. There's a lot more to it, but memorizing and grinding leak code isn't going to get you there. And so if Coding Expert sounds really interesting to you, click the link in the description. And so, yeah, anyways, that's going to do it for this one. I'll see you guys in the next one.